This podcast is sponsored by the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is a catalyst for growth and prosperity and is here to protect and promote business, inspire innovation, cultivate communities, and influence action. Learn more at fmwfchamber.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the InForum Business Beat Podcast. This is your host, Thomas Avenella. If you're a frequent listener of our show or a longtime forum reader, you know that we cover a lot of business news, particularly when it comes to new businesses opening or closing. When businesses around town make a name for themselves, we're there as well. But operating a business isn't always a walk in the park or a dream come true, and there are a lot of aspects of running a business that don't always make the news. We learned that this past week with news that West Fargo's Michelle's Table is in search of a new location on short notice. Of course, it was my fellow reporter Tammy Swift who brought you the story. Tammy has joined me once again to discuss this story, which offers an interesting peek into the life of a small business and how businesses have to overcome the sort of daily challenges that don't always make the front page. Tammy, how are you doing on this windy, snowy, gusty, terrible-looking afternoon?
Well, I'm inside, so I'm grateful for that. That's for sure.
And so, like I said in our introduction, we're going to be discussing the Michelle's Table predicament that you reported on earlier this week. So tell us a little bit about the situation with Michelle's Table and what they're going through right now.
Okay, sure. It's kind of an interesting story. Michelle's Table is a company that's owned by Michele LaHaise-Bate. And she's this really popular Red River market vendor. She's become known for just her excellent boutique catering, is what she calls it, as well as French-inspired baked goods. She makes all kinds of scones and macarons and all kinds of those things that are really hard to make. And so it's always great when you find someone who can provide them. And 2 years ago, Michelle moved into a storage complex owned by 5 Star Storage in West Fargo. And she spent her own money fixing it up into an office and a commercial kitchen. But at the end of this January, she received word from 5 Star that her lease would not be renewed. And nor would it be for any of the other tenants that happen to be in that complex, because 5 Star plans to raise the building to build temperature-controlled storage facilities. So at that time, she was told she would need to vacate her space by the end of March. Now, this especially created a problem for her because she's kind of at that stage in her career where she doesn't want to take out a bank loan to build a new commercial kitchen, and she doesn't want to give up her baking business either. I mean, she wants to continue doing this for a few more years. And she also maintained that moving a commercial kitchen and a whole business within a 2-month period would be next to impossible.
So, like you kind of hinted at there, Michelle's Table is sort of a long-running business here in the area. Tell us a bit about Michelle's background and how she kind of got started with the whole business and where it's gone over the past few years.
Sure thing. Well, she grew up in Drayton, North Dakota, but she didn't really have the very typical kind of small town upbringing in that she was kind of surrounded by foodies. Her parents were foodies. Her grandparents were foodies. She said she grew up reading Gourmet magazine, and she remembers like when her French grandmother would invite her to tea when she was just like 10 or 11 years old. And the tea would be complete with fancy French cookies, madeleines, and real Lapsang Souchong tea and china cups. And it was very fancy and very special. And she said it actually, experiences like that really shaped her for the rest of her life. So later she went into banking, which is probably as different from baking as you can get. But then she returned to what her heart really wanted. And she later turned the coffee corner at Shields into Cafe Robert and made it into a successful little bistro. And then in 2016, she started Michelle's Table. And from there, she gradually transitioned to the point where she had moved into the 5 Star complex.
So the business is growing and growing and growing, and she's moving, she's upgrading, and then all of a sudden we get to the point today where all of a sudden she's just asked to move out, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Pretty,
and
jarring.
one thing I feel like I need to add here too, and this was probably the best side nugget in the whole story, is that Michele took out a vanity license plate for the word foodie, and the Department of Transportation called her to make sure it wasn't a bad word. Is that right?
Oh my God, I loved that story because it was so novel at the time. Nobody called anybody a foodie back then. And I've been kind of looking online to try to figure out the origin of foodie. And apparently it first started creeping into the modern lexicon, like in the 1980s. And so it must have been back then. And apparently the DOT was really concerned that she was saying something naughty or I don't know on her license plate. But now we all know what a foodie is. So
And Michele is most certainly the embodiment of a foodie. I mean, this business that she's built has been growing and growing and growing and improving, and now is at the point where she's looking for something new, but feeling like she's in a tough spot. So you spoke to Five Star Storage to ask them about the situation. What did you hear from them on this?
well, I was kind of impressed with them. They actually were pretty concerned about it. As they told us, causing problems for a small business is really the last thing they wanted to do. But they also pointed out that this complex that she's located in, which is also home to Harry Details, which is a pet grooming salon, which a lot of people know and which has been around in that location for at least 15 years. But they said that structure where these businesses were located was just getting old. It was over 30 years old. It would cost too much to upgrade to make it compliant with all the newest regulations. And so what they did is they said they gave their month-to-month tenants well over the required 30-day notice, to give them a little extra time to find something. And they also connected them to commercial realtors to help them find new business space. And I was interested in something one of the owners said. He mentioned they would consider extensions on a case-by-case basis, which I am really hoping Michele noticed that comment and will take advantage of it. But on the other hand, Five Star was talking about starting construction in spring. So I'm not sure how practical that is. I don't know how long of an extension they could actually give her.
And one of the things that really intrigued me about this story is that and I mentioned this as well, we do a lot of coverage on new businesses opening. We do a lot of coverage on businesses closing, but oftentimes there are stories surrounding businesses that happen in between the opening and the closing that we don't talk about. And this is one of those things. So what are Michele's options at this point? I mean, where do you go from here if you're in this scenario? You've built this business, it's been your baby essentially, and now you're at a point where you're not ready to retire, but you want to keep going, but you've hit this wall.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, Thomas. For her most immediate catering jobs, she had all these dessert table catering jobs for weddings coming up. And one of them is actually for her own daughter's wedding. So she has kind of figured out a short range plan. She's hoping to lease space at Square One Kitchens in Fargo. That's a commercial kitchen. But she did point out that this could only be a short-term solution because Michele says her operation is too big to be based at Square One full-time. And her other solution could just be that something like social media could help her. She's wisely put some messages out there on Michelle's Tables Facebook site saying she's looking for a space. And a lot of times it's that kind of networking that bails you out. So hopefully that will inspire one of her business contacts or someone who just really loves her baking to find her a new kitchen and to give her a great rental rate for it.
And we do we have been doing, unfortunately, in the past few years, a lot of reporting on businesses that are closing. And a lot of that is due to the pandemic. And I think really the message that we've seen across the past couple of years is that businesses can be really fragile. I think we tend to see them as these sort of stable institutions in the community. They're around. We've known them for a long time. They will continue to be around, but it can really just take one little setback like this to throw everything off, and it can be extremely detrimental. Did you kind of get that feeling when you were reporting this story as well?
Absolutely. I was thinking, okay, she didn't do anything wrong. She made a lot of smart business decisions, like she wasn't going to spend an arm and a leg to build a really big, fancy, expensive kitchen because she's a mid-career baker. And so she worked within her means, fixed up what she had. And, but she did mention that she knew in the back of her mind, she would maybe get 5 years out of this space. And she got 2 years out of it. So I guess there was one part of her that was thinking, this might not last until the very end of my Michelle's Table reign. But at the same time, she just made a lot of smart decisions. She had a lot of faithful customers. And even then, she's now finding herself in a space where she has to go, what am I going to do next? Where am I going to go? Am I going to have to close down this business that I love and I'm really good at because it's just bad timing? I don't know.
And I feel like the message in this whole situation, it's really an unfortunate situation because I don't think anybody really did anything wrong here. Like you said, Michelle's made a lot of good business decisions, and 5-Star has to make their own business decisions, and they're dealing with buildings that are outdated. But I think the message here, if you're a listener, is that if you have a small business that you like in our area, you really have to go out and support them because it's just it can be an extremely fragile scenario that small business owners are dealing with. So I really hope that this situation can turn around for Michelle's Table, and I'm glad that you were able to report this story for us, Tammy.
Oh, you bet. It was my pleasure.
Once again, that does it for the InForum Business Beat podcast this week. This has been your host, Thomas Avenella. I want to thank Tammy Swift once again for joining me. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and tune in again next week for the latest business news and interviews from around the Fargo-Moorhead area.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.